Hello. My name is James. I'm a lead engineer at Rare. I've been there for about 16 years now. Started on Grab by the Ghoulies. Worked on Viva, Pinata, Connect Sports, and Sea of Thieves and Rare Replay. I had a big hand in the exhibition next door, and I will be your host, I guess, for this shindig. Next to me.
Hi, I'm Paul Machacek. I'm the test manager at Rare. I've been there for 30 years. So, yeah, it's quite a long time. So I was an engineer for about 15 years, and I worked on Battletoads, banjo-kazooie, oh, bloody hell, everything. Well, I was not supposed to do that, was I? And then I was a producer for about 10 years as well. So, yeah.
Cool. I'm Joni, executive producer. I've been there about 5.5 years, so a young pup compared to some of these guys in terms of the Rare kind of lineage. So I was there for the latter stages of Connect Sports Rivals, and obviously I've been on Sea of Thieves since then.
Hi, I'm Beanland. I'm the music director at Rare. I've been there since 1994. Trying to think, my first game was Killer Instinct, and I worked on things like Conquer, Jet Force Gemini, Sea of Thieves, of course, and lots of other stuff.
I can't remember. Hi everyone. My name's Gregg Mayles. I joined Rare from school at 18 in 1989. Spent a couple of years in the testing department then, and then somehow taught my way into design. And after doing a couple of games you've probably never heard of, I was fortunate enough to work on the Donkey Kong Country games. And then after that I did the Banjo games, Pinata, Ghoulies, Connect Sports, and currently I'm the creative director on Sea of Thieves.
The first question we've got is from Rare Gamer on Twitter, and it leads on to some of what we've been saying. What was the first game you were each involved in at Rare, and how has your job in the industry changed? I mean, Paul, you've probably been through the most butterfly, cocoon, changes throughout the entire thing.
Well, I'm not sure it was really an industry when I started. I mean, we were carving things on stone tablets, and it seemed to work. First game I did was Super Off-Road on the NES. Which was a console that existed many moons ago.
It's a great console.
It's a great console. It was fabulous. It had 2K of RAM, and we've still got games into it. Although it was almost not Super Off-Road, I nearly wrote a chess game. Rare didn't actually release a chess game, but I was briefly attached to something called Chessmaster 2000, and thankfully the legal thing fell through. And just after I got all the pieces moving around on the screen, then I got this nice car game to do. So.
Robin, how's music changed since you started?
Drastically, I suppose. The main thing is sort of memory. We started off with sort of blips and blops and very small amounts of memory for music, and now we can, if we want to, we can record symphony orchestras, and we have done. I suppose it's just that kind of whole thing of, music. You had to sort of write pretty small tunes and memorable tunes, and now it's kind of you can go and explore and sort of go down different avenues and things like that, and let the software drive that, and it's a lot more creative, I suppose, now.
How many instruments do you reckon you've learnt during your time at Rare?
I don't know, probably about 20, I suppose, something like that.
20 different instruments?
I suppose so.
Which is pretty impressive.
Yeah,
What was the hardest one?
I think the hurdy was pretty hard. The hurdy-gurdy was pretty sort of trying to get... The first time I played that, it was cranking this wheel, and it was sounding like cats fighting in the dark.
It was quite fun listening to you trying to learn how to play it.
So it was and it was actually scared me the first time I played it, and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And then it's just, stuck with it and managed to get something all right out of it, I suppose.
I think one really obvious difference that's happened is that I was employee number 17 at Rare, and when I turned up, I was the 8th engineer there, and that meant we had 8 games in production. We have far more engineers attached to our games these days. There's quite a few. I don't know how many we've got working on Sea of Thieves now, but...
Engineers, probably about 40 or 50, I'd imagine.
Yeah. I mean, the scale of the whole thing has just massively exploded over that time, and you had a lot of responsibility back then. We'd have one engineer per title, half an artist, and 1/8 of Dave Wise, who did all of our music at the time.
How does half an artist work?
Mornings and afternoons.
Painful, is it? Yeah. So I started in QA, like a lot of us, I think, back at EA just after they bought Bullfrog, so like Theme Park World kind of era in like 1999 around then. Kind of worked my way up through different roles in QA, became like a QA manager, and then moved across into the production side. And so Sea of Thieves is actually the first game that I've been involved in from the very start, alongside Gregg and a bunch of other people at that very kind of, what do we want to do next? What's the idea we want to come up with and why? So it's been a really unique experience for me to be involved at that stage and have that kind of blank slate, which is basically the hardest thing that there is, I think, is to kind of be told, do what you want, and then you've got to figure out why, and then you've got to convince people that this is the thing you want to do. But yeah, it's been very, very rewarding to go through that kind of phase, right, Greg?
Yeah, oh, definitely. It is. Having a blank piece of paper is pretty terrifying when you can actually do whatever you want, and then, as Joe says, you've got to get everybody bought into the same vision that's in your head. I always say it's like getting something out of your head into someone else's head, and that's really difficult. But if you can do it, and you can get like the whole team kind of sharing the same vision, you can create something really special. And kind of my story has been pretty much the same as all these other guys have said. Like, when I first started, there was no such thing as a games designer in the industry. The role just did not exist. Either the engineer or the artist that was working on the game, or a combination of both, would actually do the design as well. So, I guess I was right at the start of the industry's role of having a games designer. And pretty much in those days, if you played a lot of games and you knew a bit about games, then you could become a games designer. Whereas now we're a lot more critical. The people that apply to us, I mean, there's some really talented people, whether they've come from universities or whether they've taught themselves or they're using Unity themselves and they've built their own games. I mean, I just came from a background of drawing on bits of paper, which I haven't kind of grown out of. I still draw on pieces of paper, but I think the industry as a whole has diversified and specialised so much. I think personally the thing I missed the most was back in the old days, anybody could have a go at drawing graphics if you wanted to, because the graphics in the games weren't that great, so you didn't have to be a particularly talented artist. So certainly in a couple of the games I first worked on, I actually did some of the graphics, and I think I did some sound effects for one game as well.
Yep.
My one and only go at doing sound effects.
I think most of the engineers did that as well. We used to have a lot of engineer art, which would quickly get replaced if we had the opportunity.
I think we still do that now, though. If it's almost an incentive for the artist to actually step up and put what you need in there to put programmer art. I think with a lot of the Grab by the Ghoulies placeholder like chapter cards, I think we did that with very rough screenshots to chivvy along the artists. Following on from what you're saying again there, Greg, from Jeff Perez on Twitter, what games inspired you to get into the industry? You said you started straight out of school. Were there games around at the time that made you think this is exactly what I want to do as a career?
I guess you're all expecting me to say, like, at school I wanted to be a games designer, but I didn't. It was almost completely by accident. I had no intention whatsoever of getting into the industry. I used to play games as a teenager, but I think being as I didn't like the technical side of it, I didn't want to go into that role, so I never did computers at school. So when it came to leaving school, I almost went down the traditional route of getting what you consider a sensible job, and it was only at the very last minute. I think as my parents saw this tiny little advert in a local paper saying games tester wanted at Rare, and I'd grown up playing all of Ultimate's games, so I just thought, I'll go and do that for a year, and then when it doesn't work out, I'll go and get a sensible job. So that's kind of where it all started from.
It's really funny, actually. That's almost the same as mine, except my mum actually applied for my first ever job in the games industry and then told me afterwards. And so I was like, I'll go along.
She just wanted you out of the house at this point.
Yeah. And then, but as soon as literally the first day in the games industry that I had, even just like testing a game that was broken and buggy and everything, like I knew I was working with the type of people I wanted to work with and a place that I could make a career. Like, you just knew kind of instantly. Yeah. It was the right atmosphere, the right vibe, just the right kind of passion of everyone doing something really cool that they were working on, right?
Yeah. I think it was extremely non-conformist in those days. The people you were working with were, I don't know how to phrase this without insulting them. Not ordinary.
I don't think you nailed it, Greg.
No, I don't think I did. I think it was very much a hobbyist thing in those days. You didn't go. There was no such thing as a university course to go into the industry. So it tended to be people that had grown up almost playing games in their bedroom or coding or drawing stuff in the bedroom. So I mean, a lot of the people that maybe they weren't the best socially. There was. I always think to work in games, or certainly the creative side of games, you have to have that slight edge to people, and that's like when designers apply to Rare, I'm looking for that kind of slight quirk or that slight edge, because I think that's where the really cool ideas come from. And although it's got a lot more mainstream nowadays, I still think to work in the industry, I'm still looking for that kind of character and the same kind of personality that we want in people that actually goes into our games.
Our most recent design hire didn't have any direct games industry experience.
That's right, no whatsoever.
But he came from designing escape rooms, which was really interesting when we saw that on his CV, right? And because you've got to go through the same thought process around designing things and learning, watching people try and figure these puzzles out and stuff and then get through. So that guy came in, and it's just a coincidence that he looks a little bit like a young version of you, doesn't he?
That's you're not the first person to say that. That's actually my retirement plan. We've hired someone that looks a little bit like me, and then gradually I'm going to try and teach him all I know, and then I'm just going to disappear.
And how about for you, Robin? Because obviously with composing, you could film, TV. Why did you choose games?
I worked in TV, and first thing I did was I wanted to be a rock star in a band, which
we've seen the pictures.
Yeah, I did that.
You had some glorious hair back in the day as well, Robin, didn't you? Everyone check that out on Twitter.
We had a Radio 1 session on the Tommy Vance show, Tommy Vance in his leather pants, and then I started doing sort of TV music. And I think it was my brother had a Amiga 500, and he was playing a lot of the Bitmap Brothers games, and that was the sort of first time I thought this is actually starting to sound like music, I think. And I started to explore. I got an Amiga 500, borrowed one, and did a demo on it and sent discs out to various companies. I got a really nice letter back from Martin Brown at Team 17 saying, "This music's fantastic, really really like it. However, you're very unlikely to get a few $100K to write music in a game. You need to sort of really know the machine inside out." And it was just kind of that sort of process. I did some TV stuff, and then I think it was, again, Rare were looking for a composer, and I sent a tape off and got an interview, and I've been there ever since. But I think it was definitely the Bitmap Brothers stuff that was the first thing I thought, this is actually starting to sound less like Blink Blink Fizz and more like music.
Yeah. And did you start bedroom coding? Was it?
Yeah. When you look at all the engineers that originally started at Rare, Chris Stamper dropped out of Loughborough Uni. None of the rest of us went to uni. We were all self-taught in bedrooms at home, except I think Chris Sutherland. I think he actually had an education. The rest of us were thickos. I taught myself to write games, actually. I was playing a few games, and I learned to program, which is actually the thing I wanted to do. So I thought I'd write some games, and I did that on ZX Spectrums and those sorts of computers at that time. And by the time I did my A-levels, I'd had about 3 or 4 games actually released. I was approaching publishers back then. And I worked freelance for a couple of years after that. And the last game that I did was published by Codemasters, and complete random accident, a friend of mine knew the Stamper Brothers at Rare, and I ended up getting an invite to come up, and I showed them a game, and we spoke about sheep for half an hour. And 30 years later, I'm embarrassing myself telling this story. So I'd already written and published a bunch of games by the time I joined Rare. I'm much more interested when I interview people, I don't care about what their education is. If people can string words together better than I'm doing right now and show me stuff that they've actually done and talk about it and critique it and don't sound like a complete muppet, then I might carry on talking to them. So.
I think it's
Was that good?
Yeah.
Well encapsulated.
Because I think being although it's been 16 years, I guess the newer wave of engineers.
The GoldenEye team was the newer wave.
The newer wave. It's the eras of Rare at this point. I had a traditional university education on that, but I was fixated on games throughout it. I think at the time my lecturers were quite surprised that someone wanted to do something other than web design or banking software at this point. So I spent my entire last year trying to make a 3D engine for my dissertation. It worked. It ran at 3 frames a second, and I think you were being chased by a white triangle around a cube. But I wrote it on myself, and I think that combined with the fact I did art A-level piqued the interest of Chris Sutherland and people, so got me in. So, nowadays, I think as long as you can program, as long as you've got an interest outside of just pure programming. We want people who have personalities, who like doing games, who do things off their own back as well. We get a whole mix nowadays. The next question we've got on our list is musical related. So I'm going to look directly at Robin for this one. Is there anything new in the works for Sea of Thieves music similar to the We Shall Sail Together tune?
Yes.
Splendid. Next question. Tick.
We've just released a trailer for Forsaken Shores. I wrote a little shanty for that. Then John McMurtry gave me some lyrics, and he actually sang them to Gregg Mayles. So I think we should do a new melody for that. And so we wrote that for the trailer, but there seems to be quite a lot of positive response to that tune. So I'm thinking that was probably going to be along the same lines as Becalmed as well. We shall sail. Yeah.
So have you got a lot of shanties in the back pocket, shall we say?
There's a few, yeah. There's a few waiting to go.
Yeah.
Don't forget the one I did.
Yeah, there's that one. The rubbish say that
When you're really desperate.
Is it broadcastable?
It is. Yeah. Okay. It's just not of the quality that Robin normally expects.
So, possibly one for Joe now. We've got a question from Daniel on Twitter. Will you add the feature where we can change our pirate in Sea of Thieves?
I think requests like that definitely fit. Like for Sea of Thieves, there's things we would love to do and that make sense, and things that kind of don't. And that obviously fits into the things we'd love to do that make sense. It's just a question of when it comes on our roadmap, right? We know why people want that. At the moment, our focus is on adding new things to the world, right? New ways to play, kind of new goals, new rewards, new stuff to enrich the journey. But we will get back and we will allow that in future for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's enough threads internally as well about all the suggestions and.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, one of the most ridiculous threads we've got on our internal forums is one called Quick Fun. That I think started as Quick Fun, like suggestions for little tweaks that we could do to the boats or little, and soon just spun off into having things like, can we have a sky kraken? Just a giant beast that goes through the sky and plucks your ships and hurls it. So there's plenty of ideas in the works for that. One from Dr. Marcus Brody on Twitter. For those of you who don't know, that's my wife. What Easter eggs have you managed to sneak in the game, in any of the games that you've done? Have you managed to get in any little nuggets that have got past or have been signed off by production? Is it these ones that you're not willing to admit?
I've got an appropriate one before you guys get going. Yeah. So it was back before I joined Rare. I was at Sumo Digital and I worked on Sonic and All Stars Racing Transformed. And one of the weapons that you could send was like these swarms of kind of bees, which would land on the track in front of you and they would attack you if you kind of hit. It was like a first place leader attack. And so the announcer would say kind of bees whenever you pick up that weapon or whatever. Like they'd tell you whatever weapon you've got. And there was someone called James Drew that worked at the studio that was an artist, and he was terrified of bees or wasps, but he'd call them sky tigers, right? And he would literally run screaming from wherever you were, like if you were outside having lunch or you were having a beer at the pub or something, he'd just be running off screaming sky tigers. And so we got the announcer to record sky tigers instead of bees, and so literally the night before submission of the build, I was like, did that get in? And like Cheeves, who was an engineer, was like, no, we haven't got it in yet. And I was like, just get it in, it's low risk. And this was like 2 a.m. or something, and you can imagine.
Before you shipped the build?
Yeah, before we submitted the game.
Sweating thinking of this.
And we made that change about 2 a.m, so it's like once every 10 times you pick up that weapon, the announcer will just go, Sky Tigers. And and we just put it in just because it was funny. Nice. And the game didn't break, so therefore it was fine.
I did try to get Easter eggs in once. On Viva Pinata 2, I was in charge of making sure the build was packaged up and sent to test properly, so there were times where I was stopping there late at night, and there's only so long you can just watch a progress bar before you get bored. And this was the time we had a lot of rock band instruments around the office. So I made it my mission to try and make it so you could garden using a Guitar Hero controller. You could just wander around the garden with like the whammy bar, and then to water flowers, you just tip the neck. Dave Wong, our tester, freaked out when I told him about this. Something about a test matrix and 2 weeks to go to shipping. So unfortunately, it never quite made it.
We've done lots of things that we shouldn't have done with 2 weeks to go to ship.
The next question we've got is from DS on Twitter, and it's for Gregg. Will you guys ever make a Grab by the Ghoulies 2? And if you did, what sort of ideas would you like to put in it?
I think the simple answer is probably no. I don't think it was certainly you wouldn't consider it our most successful game, even though it was a great laugh to work on. And the team had a lot of fun making it. I think Grab by the Goalies was a bit of a casualty when we swapped from Nintendo to Microsoft, because it was originally a GameCube game and it was designed very much with a Nintendo audience in mind, and then we swapped kind of halfway through to try and make it work for an Xbox audience, and it just didn't really fit. That kind of very simple, almost cartoonesque kind of fun throwaway game didn't really sit on this kind of higher powered console where everything else was brown and grey shooting games. So it didn't quite fit in. We didn't have enough time to kind of change the tone of it or kind of age it up a bit, which is what I would have done. So I think if I was to do another one, we always start thinking about, if we were to do another game, what would we do? So in the case of Ghoulies, I was going to make it more. It was actually a bit before its time. It was going to be a bit more open world. So rather than like going into like individual rooms, I was going to make it kind of a bit more open, so you could kind of wander around a village, like a haunted village. But the lack of sales kind of scuppered all of that.
I'm genuinely impressed that you managed to get any Xbox marketing team to sign off on the name, though. Grabbed by the Ghoulies. Like.
I think that was in the early days of when they bought Rare, and it was kind of, we've bought you guys to do things differently and be a bit kind of out there and a bit provocative. So in the early days, we had that. We had a Game Boy game that me and Paul worked on. It's Mr. Pants. I don't think we'd get that one past Phil Spencer these days, but back in the day, that was fine.
I'll tell you what, we even went too far on that. There was one animated icon for the save game slot, and when Gregg saw it, he basically went, "You're not putting that in the game." And I don't know if you recall it, but it was highly suggestive. I'll leave it there. Anyway.
No, but I don't think there's many games I've worked on that I wouldn't like to do again, but it's just a case of I'd always prefer to do something new over something old. So that's...
Possibly leading on from that, we've got a question from Manuel Garcia on Twitter. How has Rare maintained their distinctive art and musical style over the years as staff has come and gone? And has there ever been any serious discussion about changing direction?
I think just creatively, I think you could probably lump all the disciplines together, whether it's kind of art or design, all the creative direction, and it's kind of almost in the DNA originally of the company, but then it kind of gets passed to the people, and even though people change over the years, that kind of DNA gets kind of passed down, and kind of new people come in and they add their bit to it, but at the core of it, Rare is still kind of, people still thinking, I think, in the same way that certainly I did when I joined in the late 80s, and that came directly from the Stampers. That was their way of thinking. That's how they wanted to entertain people, and they just kind of basically infused that in all their employees at the time. And then kind of as the company's grown and expanded and people have come and gone, their kind of thinking and the way they approach games has remained. And I think it's typically British, if there is such a thing. I think Rare is quite unashamedly a British company and always has been. You can see it in the kind of the sense of humour, the charm, the quirkiness. We don't do things conventionally. We're always looking for like a kind of a unique way to do things, and sometimes we get it right and sometimes we get it wrong. But I think that's what makes Rare what it is. It's kind of very unique in a very crowded industry.
I agree with that. When I joined in 1988, I didn't know about the handful of NES titles that Rare had done up until that point, because they weren't really visible in this country. All we knew about was what Ultimate had done, and you accidentally get a gig at your Heroes, and then you think, oh no, I've got to write an Ultimate game, basically. And some of them went better than others. But then other people that were joining at the time were seeing the same thing. So there was like this ethos that, oh God, we've all joined Ultimate accidentally, and what do we do now? We better work our socks off and create some really cool stuff. And then more people come in and they see what you're building, and it feeds on itself. And after 30 years, there's a lot of passion in the studio. There's a lot of people coming in. Faces have changed, but there's a huge diversity in what we're doing. And without wanting to constantly come back to Sea of Thieves, which is obviously current, You can see it in what we're doing today. It's very different from what we've done before, but there's passion there, and people want to make the best of it, you know. So.
But the difference is partly what attracted me as well. I look back at all the NES games and the SNES and the N64 games I played before starting, and it was the variety that attracted me to the company as well. I think that's part of the DNA, the fact that we don't try and stick to one thing for too long. We might try 2, 3 things, but then everyone wants to try something new because there's so many other different genres, different things we want to try. I think to Gregg's point, like there's always something new, something more exciting that we could try and move on to.
It's incredibly hard to be successful with something, and as Gregg says, you start from nothing, and it's like, well, how do you turn that into something that people actually want to play? And you know what? For every game that you can think of that we've done that did all right, there were plenty of others that didn't.
Are you bagging on Grab by the Ghoulies again here?
I'm thinking about Beetlejuice, actually.
Robin, how do you think the music style is?
I think with the music, it's that thing of just trying to do something different with it again, whether it be when we were on the N64 and we do things like with the channel fades, when you move to a certain area, certain other instruments would fade up and join in with the music. And I suppose it's still that kind of thing of what can we do with the music and what can we do that's still things that are funny, I suppose. Somebody comes to you and says, I've got a giant boss made out of feces and I want him to sing an opera. Can you write a tune for that? It's like, yeah, okay, so there's that one. And then I suppose Sea of Thieves is the obvious one with that is you can get drunk and play a shanty drum. And it's still like, it's still trying to think of those sort of funny...
But we're not advocating that. Drinking where?
Exactly, and this is definitely water.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
I remember you spent a lot of time at the start of Sea of Thieves. We knew we were going to have shanties, but it'd been so easy just to write a shanty, like a traditional shanty. I remember you spending ages, and we had some chats about how can we bring something new to
yes, because
something very obvious and traditional.
Yeah. And we looked at like traditional shanties, and they all just felt a little bit too dry and a little bit too serious. And it's like, well, we want it to sound like a load of pirates who have got no idea how to play instruments. It's all a bit rough around the edges, but they're just, you know, a gang of pirates just singing and having a good laugh. And then things like, what if they drink a load of grog and then start playing instruments? And it's that kind of, just having that thing of it just being a bit quirky and a bit, and I suppose it gets back to the sort of British thing again. It's got a kind of very British sound to it, I think.
Even the instruments you bought, right, for Sea of Thieves, like, because you went to music shops, like, looking for really rare instruments, like the hurdy-gurdy and stuff. But, like, I remember you telling me about, like, they'd bring out a bunch of them, and there's, like, a nice new one, and you're like, no, not that one. I want the one that's a bit broken and that sounds a bit rubbish and stuff, because that's what pirates' musical instruments that's been carried around on a boat and dropped overboard and stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, like the concertina, there was a cabinet full of these different concertinas. And we tried each one. I mean, I don't play the concertina, I would just play a few notes on it. But it all sounded kind of very clean, a very nice sound. And then there was this one at the back, which was a student one. So it's quite hard to play because the buttons are smaller, closer together. But it just had all these creaks and the buttons were really clicky and stuff. And it had this, it just sounded really piratey. It sounded like it had been on a boat and been kicked around the place. And there's a big rip in the bellow. So it wheezes quite a lot as well.
I'm hoping you got a discount.
It was pretty expensive still.
You could have pointed out all these broken things.
That's the special part of it.
But it even goes to the piano you've got in the music room as well, because there was... Because I go up and play the drums in the music room, and for ages...
Oh, was it you?
And all of a sudden one day, just this big piano appeared. And I know you'd been looking for one for a while, but talking to yourself and Jamie, they waited till they could find one that was water damaged. Like, I think it was like an insurance write-off job or something like that. But
well, they said we don't want to sell you it because we've had a flood, and we were like, that sounds like the perfect piano. Yeah, because we didn't want to use it as a piano. I've got loads of nice piano samples and things like that. We just wanted to hit it with stuff. And
you didn't tell the shop this, did you?
Straight, yeah, I think we did. Yeah, I think we just said we're not. They said, aren't you going to come and try it? I said, no, just deliver it. It's fine. We just wanted to take the lid off it and scrape the strings and hit it and put other things on that would rattle and bang the keys and stamp the pedals. And it's that kind of. I suppose that's the thing. For me at Rare, I have a massive opportunity to just go and explore and do this stuff instead of like, we need a tune, get a tune written. It's very much like, just go and create. And having a session of doing all that sort of stuff, banging about, scraping the strings, that basically ended up being the the foundation of the Skellythorpe music. That whole kind of rhythm and stuff they get on that is all that piano, but it's not being played as a piano.
We'll take one more question from the piece of paper in front of me, and then we'll open up to you folks in the audience. It's probably going to be a quick one because it might be along the same lines as earlier. This is from Hood News Media on Twitter. Will ships sections or ships ever become destructible?
So, basically, will we enhance destruction on ships in the future?
Yeah.
That definitely sounds like something in the we would love to do that bucket.
Yes.
For sure. And we've prototyped some of that stuff early on. We've prototyped masts coming down and additional damage and things. And so we know it's cool. We know that that's a real visceral kind of thing as well when you see it from a distance and you see it kind of toppling. So we definitely want to do that in the future for Sea of Thieves, like keep growing and adding to the kind of strategy and the tactics and just the emergence of ship battles and everything else, right?
It's not in the quick fun section, though, is
That's
it?
not in the quick fun
Sadly
section,
not.
but it's in the fun section for sure. Yeah.
Grand. Okay. So we'll start taking questions from the audience. We do not have a microphone that we can pass around, but if you please put your hand up, we will select.
That was quick.
That was
Cool.
Thank you. What was the inspiration for the banjo-kazooie series?
What was the inspiration for the banjo-kazooie series? As we all turn to Gregg.
You probably, by asking that question, you probably know the history a little bit of banjo, how it started off as Dream. So for the benefit of people that don't, once we'd finished doing Donkey Kong Country, we took the graphics technology and thought, what else could we do with this instead of a platform game? So we're all massive fans of Zelda, so we thought, could we apply that kind of same graphics technology to an adventure game? So we spent a couple of months kind of messing around with the graphics to see whether we could do it, and by that point we got this lead character that was like a young boy with a wooden sword. So obviously inspired a bit by Link, but we went like kind of. It was almost inspired probably by my childhood growing up as a kid. I'd like make things out of wood. I'd make my own armor and swords and shields, and then like batter my brother and our friends. So I wanted this kind of feel of like he wasn't like a hero. He didn't have a proper sword. It felt like something he'd made. And kind of Dream progressed for a while, and we struggled with the technology, and we realised it wasn't going anywhere. And I think we'd had this game with this young boy in it for so long that we got pretty much fed up with looking at him. So we thought, right, let's change it to something else. We're fed up with this boy. So we thought, let's make it an animal instead. I don't know why, but we did. And we tried a rabbit to start with. I think it lasted 2 days because it looked absolutely terrible. And then the next thing we tried was a bear. And that bear was Banjo. And it was uncanny how similar that bear that we first drew in Dream, in an adventure game, actually became Banjo in the game. Like, the fact he wears a backpack has got nothing to do with Kazooie whatsoever. The fact he wears a backpack is because it was an adventure game, and the idea was you go around collecting all this stuff, and he'd store it in his backpack and then fetch it out when it was needed. So Kazooie wasn't even in it at that point. And then we were fortunate enough to see a really, really early version of Mario 64, way before anyone else had seen it. It was this very simple demo of Mario running around on these really simple 3D blocks, and we thought, what we're doing is going to be so outdated. So we basically scrapped everything we did that we were doing with Banjo at that point and basically rebuilt it, wrote our own 3D engine, and basically we took everything out of the old Dream apart from Banjo because we liked the bear character. We thought, well, let's take that character, put it in a game that's a bit like Mario, put our twist on it, and that's the game that eventually became Banjo-Kazooie. So slightly convoluted, but most games are. If you track a history of a game back far enough, how they came about, how they started, or the kind of things that happened before a game started. I mean, like Sea of Thieves was no grand plan that we intended to make this game. It was like we did Kinect Sports Rivals. It didn't do very well. Basically, we had to change tack. So it was like literally if Kinect Sports had continued to do well, we wouldn't be working on Sea of Thieves now. So it's the fact that those games came to a halt, and we were just told, just make a rare game, for today's audience, that was pretty much the only kind of guidance we followed. So there's a lot of games like that when you track them back. Like GoldenEye, probably one of Rare's most famous games, was a movie license that we didn't really want to do, to be honest. We did it as a favour for Nintendo because they'd entered into this contractual obligation to do it. They didn't have a studio to do it. We said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. Well, obviously, to try and kind of gain some favour in a later day, and it was a game that many people in the studio didn't want to work on, to be honest. So we gave it to a bunch of new employees, most of whom had never made a game before, and they started off. And I think to start with, it was very similar to Time Crisis. You know, the game where you press the pedal and the kind of the guy hides behind boxes. So it's very much an on-rails shooter. So it wasn't even the GoldenEye that everybody got to love. And I'm sure there was a couple of points where the game was actually officially cancelled, but we never actually told the team. so they were still working on this game, and I think there'd been some falling out with some legal falling out. So the game was actually on hold for a couple of times. We never told the team. It's like, yeah, just carry on, and I'm sure it'll sort itself out. And it did. And initially, GoldenEye wasn't a success. We all went to E3 in that year, and the stand was absolutely empty. There was no one playing it. We thought, oh God, it's like, thank God that's out the way. We can get back to doing our own games, our own IP. And then gradually the sales started mounting up, and it was like, oh, actually this is doing okay actually. And then in the end, it became a massive success. So I think you're never really sure how a game's going to do and where it's going to come from and how it's going to end up. All you can really do is try your best, and then a lot of it's in the hands of the gods as to how it does and what you're going to be doing next.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes.
It's a question to Paul. In your time at Rare, what challenge have you found particularly most difficult? And also, what challenge have you found particularly most rewarding?
So the question is, during our time at Rare, what challenges have we found most difficult and what have we found the most rewarding? Do you want to start, Paul?
Well, I came in as an engineer, and telling a computer what to do is very easy. Becoming a producer and telling people what to do, but you learn, and it gets easier over time. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
What was the most rewarding?
Most rewarding. Oh, I
Telling people what to do.
No. Certain projects, but for different reasons. You know, I could think the last Nintendo game that I worked on was Viva Pinata Pocket Paradise, and apart from the fact that I actually really liked the end product, it worked really, really well on that system. The team was just rocking and rolling. It was just an incredibly smooth development. We really didn't have any problems, and so that was fun. Going into the office one day and having Tim Stamper come up to myself and Kev Bayliss, who was art director at the time, and saying, could you pick up this project that's not going very well somewhere else? And then on me saying, well, what's the deadline? And this is, by the way, this has been going on for 9 months. And me saying, what's the deadline? And the response I got was Saturday. And then him saying, well, you know what? If you can do it in 3 months, we think we can stall the publisher for that long. And so we beavered away ballistic hours, Kev and I, for 3 months knocking that out. And it went out. A game called WWF Superstars. It did very well. So that was lucky. Yes.
Cool. Joe?
I think the most challenging thing for me actually was when I joined, it was in kind of the latter stages of Connect Sports Rivals, and I'd never worked on a Connect game before. And so, as a producer, I've always been a very kind of gameplay-orientated producer, so working closely with design, with engineer, but really like playing, giving feedback, helping push the gameplay forward and try and create a really kind of polished, balanced and kind of satisfying experience. And so you know how things work with a controller because you've grown up playing that all the time, but then you come in and you try and use your instinct and to make design decisions or push decisions through using a completely different control system that just doesn't work in the way you'd expect, and having to learn all the nuances of how it recognizes different parts of the body, and if you put your hand in front or if you're wearing reflective clothing then it won't work properly, like all of this crazy stuff. And so it was actually really tough on my morale as a person, as a human being, because I was like, I'm suddenly, I think probably before that 9 out of 10 times, like your decision or your gut would be right when it comes to a kind of gameplay feel thing or kind of a gameplay mechanic, and it suddenly shifted to like 50-50 at best with something like with Connect. And so that learning curve, that challenge, but coming into a team that they'd already gone through 2 Connect games, there were a lot of people that had that experience, but it was still super hard. And so for me that was so challenging to kind of adapt to that. It really was. It was actually like a really tough kind of period in my career, to be honest, because I'd just kind of all that experience and knowledge that I'd built up over time was kind of thrown out the window as I was working with a completely different mechanic. And like that was really hard, actually. But then switching that, the most rewarding for me was in the early stages of Sea of Thieves, or Athena as it was then before we'd even picked the name. And I think like working with Gregg, working with our prototype team, like Andy and Shelley, the engineers and stuff, like a really small team, for that first 6 months, figuring out the idea, putting together like a pitch for it. So literally a set of slides talking about why we want to make this game. Players creating stories together was the kind of phrase that we used and the kind of vision we had. And then layering pirates on and building this prototype out. But and then we had Phil Spencer, who came over, like Kudo Sonoda, who was part of his leadership team at the time, Phil Harrison, who was like head of Europe, and some of the other Xbox leadership team, and they had no idea what we were doing at Rare. We'd kind of kept it secret on purpose, and we're like, you can come over to the studio, and we'll tell you. And we took them through the pitch, and then they were like, oh, this sounds cool, and then we were like, all right, now you're going to play it, right? And because we'd been building this prototype up that was not pretty, but like it had been done in Unity. It was all about proving the game experience, and I think that was a really brave decision for us to get like a bunch of executives playing something so early, where normally you get something really polished, really sexy, and really try and wow them and blow them away with explosions and visuals or whatever. And we were like, no, we felt so good about the gameplay experience that we'd crafted in that time, and that we wanted to put them in front and play it. And we actually videoed them too. And we didn't tell them that we were videoing them playing the game. So we had a camera kind of on top of each of their monitors. And we actually edited a video together and sent it to them a week later saying, here's the first story from Sea of Thieves, the first player-created story together. But it was that moment, I think, when they came back from the play session, they were all laughing, they were chatting, they were sharing their stories, they were doing exactly what we expected. And we'd very craftily put the business part of the pitch at the end of the day, after they'd played the game, after we'd kind of gone through it. So, and they'd sign anything at that stage. But it was very, like, I think it was like when that had wrapped up, and there was myself, there was Gregg, there was Ryan, the art director, there was Mike, like our design director, like a bunch of others. We all kind of all just gathered together, I think, and we were like, I think we're going to make this game, like, because you having that idea, putting that together, and then going through it. I think at that moment, that was when I think I knew anyway that we had something incredibly special, and that we were going to get the chance to go on that journey together and make it. And so yeah, that for me was the most satisfying moment of my time at Rare, for sure.
I think for me the most challenging was probably when I first arrived at Rare, and I think it was just getting into that headspace of I've come from writing music for TV, and I'm not even had any concept of you've got to fit it into a small amount of memory. And my first game, Killer Instinct, was 4 megabytes of memory to fit all the music, all the sound effects into. When you think about a minute of audio is 10 meg, at like sort of full bandwidth. It's like, well, how are we going to do this? And it was just that. I think it was that coupled with trying to just get into that sort of that Rare kind of headspace of making music for video games and creating sound effects as well, which was I signed up as a composer, but it was at the interview it was like, well, we want you to do sound design as well, so that was completely new to me as well. But it was quite a sort of 6 month. The game's coming out in 6 months, so you have to sort of get on it pretty quick. So that was pretty challenging. And I think in terms of like the sort of most rewarding thing, I think it's that kind of. It's not just one experience, I don't think. I think it's just that thing of you, when you're working on a game, you've got no idea. You're kind of in this eye of the storm almost. You don't have any idea of what it's going to be like and how it's going to be received. And I think it's just when people really enjoy the game and you get that feedback from them, it's just amazing. There's some fantastic stories with the community who've been playing Sea of Thieves and people who are just not not that social online. It's really sort of brought them out of the shells and stuff like that. There's so many sort of different. It's usually just the feedback from people, and when people sort of do covers of your music and I've done a version of this song that you wrote, that is an amazing sort of feeling, really. Like, you feel quite privileged that somebody would take the time to go and do that. So not one thing, but lots of different things.
I think you can kind of split it up into mental and physical stuff. I think I'd agree with Joe that Connect was probably mentally the hardest and most demanding thing I faced as a designer. Likewise, you just had to throw everything you knew about games design mostly out of the window because you hadn't got a controller. It was a very different type of game, but at the same time, the fact we actually managed to release a game was incredibly rewarding. And when we first, I think it was table tennis, we first got working. Once we got table tennis working, even in a really simple form, it was a really special moment. So I think that was probably mentally the hardest challenge. I think physically would be any of the early games where we just all worked crazy hours to get things finished because we had a passion. The teams were very small. Everyone was kind of, you didn't rely on anybody else to get your job done. You could just, if you put the hours in, you could pretty much create what you wanted to. And I think a lot of people embraced that and basically just went for it. And certainly we knew what opportunity we had when we did Donkey Kong Country in the early 90s. So the team was just basically almost killed themselves to get it done. But at the time, you look back at it and we all no one was telling us to do it. We just absolutely wanted to make the best game we possibly could, but physically, there's certainly no way I could do that these days. I was in my early 20s, so I could manage it back then, but and now you just couldn't do that, and it's just not self-sustaining. I don't think I'd want to do it even if I could. In terms of rewarding, I'd certainly agree with Joe that when we first got the Sea of Thieves prototype up and running and we actually played it, that was one of the special moments that I've come across at Rare, but there's been others. I think going to visit NCL in Japan and getting to chat with basically all your heroes at Nintendo was a really cool moment, and I'll certainly always remember that. Or particularly trying to explain to Mr. Miyamoto how the game of cricket works was a particular highlight because he just could not understand that. There's 11 people in the team, but when 10 people are out, the 11th person's out as well. He goes, oh, so he doesn't get to go? It's like, no, he has to go as well. It's like, just couldn't understand it, but it's just sometimes the little things that you pick up along the way. But generally, finishing any game is rewarding, whether you absolutely hated working on it or whether it was the best game in the world or whether it did really successful or it didn't. Just working with a bunch of people, creating something from scratch and then actually releasing it is an incredibly rewarding experience.
Thank you very much for the question. Anyone else? Let us go right at the back.
Have you guys ever gotten in trouble for your sense of humor with a publisher, particularly with Nintendo? And I have to ask, will we ever see another Banjo platform?
So have we got into trouble for our sense of humour with our platform holders?
Yes, many times.
Are there any that we can reveal here?
Be careful.
Oh, we'll be careful.
I thought he was just about to pull out a list.
No, I think we've certainly Rare's games are always kind of E-rated or kind of like younger audience, but we were all massive fans of The Simpsons, and The Simpsons is a really good example of multi-layered humour where there's things in there for kids and then there's stuff that's aimed at a slightly older audience, and we all love The Simpsons, so we started trying to think along the same lines. It's like, okay, this game's got an E rating, but what could we squeeze in there? Then it became it became almost a game between us trying to fit things in, and legal departments and publishers trying to spot them and take them out. And I don't think any of it was malicious. We just wanted our games to have that edge, to have that humour, to kind of, for older players to see things in the game or read things and appreciate it. So we didn't do it because we were just being idiots. We were just trying to kind of have some fun. And yeah, sometimes we probably overstepped the line, and fortunately they were spotted and we took them out. And we're all a little bit more mature these days. So even though we still put Easter eggs
To scale.
to scale, to scale. We did actually have a skeleton as our Twitter handle for a while, so I don't think that kind of sense of humour is going to go away anytime soon. But I still think there's still room to try and put things in. Like if you read through the dialogue in Sea of Thieves, there's definitely some double meaning in there. There's definitely some nods to future games. There's nods to all sorts of things, but I think maybe whereas in the past it was very much in your face, it's a lot more subtle these days. So you have to work a lot harder to find it.
The back.
You mentioned that you did a build of Sea of Thieves in Unity and then switched over to Unreal. So first question is, what was the reasoning behind switching to Unreal? And also, are there any Easter eggs in Sea of Thieves that nobody's found yet?
So the question was for our podcast recording equipment. We started in Unity and moved to Unreal for Sea of Thieves. Why did we do that? The main reason is that Unreal was far more, I guess, expandable for the type of game that we wanted to build. Unity was great for us to put it together. In fact, it sort of spawned out of a game jam right at the beginnings, and our main engine during that was Unity, because so many people in the studio knew how to do it. We also got people to come in and give tutorials, so let the artists jump in as well. So much of the early work was just done because of that knowledge that everyone had towards it. But we did a big assessment. We pretty much just what is the pros and cons of having Unity and Unreal? And at the end of the day, Unreal won out, and so we started transferring across.
Yeah. Well, it was I think even before, when we were doing the assessment, and even at the early stage of when we were deciding what engine to use for the prototype, I think we knew the most likely engine we'd end up with, if we went with an external one, was going to be Unreal. And so there were some conversations going, should we prototype in that so we can start getting used to it and stuff? And I remember the conversations, and it was no, we should pick the best tool for prototyping and proving out the vision and the idea as soon as possible, and for speed of iteration and everything, and especially because we weren't relying on anything super pretty, so just about speed of iteration, just about getting designers and engineers to fly through kind of gameplay kind of feel and stuff. Unity was absolutely the right kind of reason and decision.
And so, for the long term as well, I think it was great that we had the split, because for that very essence of speed, some of the code is nasty, dirty code deep down that we do not want anywhere near our production code. So it was nice also having that ability to take a breath, look what we want to bring over, and then bring it over nicely as well. So keep a nice pretty code base that works, and then a hackathon on one side. So that's good. Question, yes.
Question for all. What is your favourite rare or ultimate title that you did not work on?
What is our favourite rare or ultimate title we didn't work on? Do we have to have been there when it was worked on?
No, just overall.
Okay. So, Solar Jetman, always Solar Jetman. But I honestly really wish I'd worked on Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, because I was doing Viva Pinata at the time when that was going on in the other barn. And I remember coming over every Friday or something. I think you had bizarre race challenges. So I walked in one afternoon and they were racing the alphabet. They were just making cars out of letters and seeing which one would go fastest around the track. So that just level of insanity just really, I wish I'd been a part of it.
Well, I was a big fan of Ultimate games, obviously, hence I'm here. I remember walking into my sixth form study when I was at school one day, and my mate, who I shared the study with, was playing a game. We had a Spectrum in there. I took one look at it, and I just said to him, is that the new Ultimate game? Because it couldn't possibly have been anything else. And that was Night Law, which I went back to recently. Very hard and unforgiving. But it just set things in stone for me. And actually, the last game that I wrote, which Codemasters published, was a 3D isometric puzzle-style game along those lines, so it had quite an influence on me.
I'm going to cheat a little bit and go with Rare Replay because I didn't work directly on that, even though I was there at the time, and obviously James was.
You were
was
pointing
lead engineer.
cannons at us at the time.
I was pointing cannons at your barn while you were working on it, yeah. But for me, for a couple of reasons. One, because it gave me a way to discover loads of Rare games that I hadn't played, and all of this, and to see why everyone was such fans of Rare and of all these kind of games back in the day and stuff, and to see them brought in this one place where it was really easy to play them. You didn't have to go and run an emulator or anything else, and so that was super cool to just discover all of these games that I hadn't played in the past, right? You know, I kind of grew up with the Commodore 64 with the Amiga, and then skipped a little bit to PlayStation, so I didn't really get to see all of the Rare games. And the other thing though was that the passion of the team that worked on that compilation, that like there's been loads of compilations over the years, right, that have been just a bunch of games shoved in a box and thrown out and like try and generate some cash, right? You know, there's so many different publishers have done, but you had a team there that were all Rare fans that all had their passion about what game they wanted to push in it. You know, Night Law was in it, like Jetpack and
Solar Jetman.
Yeah, Solar Jetman, sorry. But like, but. To see everybody pushing for the ones they wanted, and then to push to get like a progression system in, and to get all these rewards, and like the stuff that Khan did with the Battletoads, making it like endlessly replayable, that kind of like stuff. All of those things were just born out of a team that had so much passion for what they were doing, and the song at the start, like all of that, like genuinely incredible. And so to see that come together while we were working on something else, and then to be able to play it, like that for me is my favorite Rare game, because for all of those reasons. But I just love to play a game that shows the passion of the team that's working on it, right? And it was coming out of every pore of Rare Replay. So, and I saw how hard they worked to deliver that in the time that they had as well. So yeah, that's definitely my favorite one.
Sorry, could I just say, actually, at one point early on in that project, there was a big whiteboard in one of the barns. I think you were in charge of it, I can't remember. But and there was a little card up for every single game that could possibly be a candidate to be in this. And they had to be whittled down to 30 games. And I remember being dragged up there one day with a couple of other people, some of the old-timers, and we were being asked what we thought, you know, which ones should be included. And I remember standing there going, no, not those two, they're and you know, it wasn't just everybody fighting for their favourite. Obviously, Night Law was always going to be in there, but there were others that you just going, no, just don't bring that back. Nobody wants to see that.
We had the best stack of top trump cards, really, at the end of it. We literally had like laminated cards from them all that was like everyone, they're making their own perfect lineup for it. So Robin.
I'm trying to think. There's quite a few that I haven't worked on that are really, yeah. I think Viva Pinata's pretty much up there. I think that's a fantastic, just a whole kind of visual thing. I think it was really just quite an original idea as well. But there's loads really. Perfect Dark's another one that I'd really like to have worked on. And the remake of Jetpack, I think. I'm going for 3.
3?
Yeah.
I'd choose Killer Instinct, actually. I was a huge Street Fighter 2 player back in the day. I'm absolutely rubbish now, and I haven't played a fighting game for years, but back in the day, we had a Street Fighter 2 arcade cabinet at Rare, so we'd play most lunchtimes and after 5, and kind of when we were doing a fighting game, it's like, I wish I could have worked on that. I think I was doing Donkey Kong at the time, so I couldn't work on it. But it was just one I was a fan of fighting games, and 2, that kind of level of mechanics with the kind of touchy-feely, kind of intricate gameplay of how all the moves work together. That would have been heaven for me, because I've always had that kind of focus on kind of the core player experience, and for me, a fighting game cannot hide behind any kind of fancy backgrounds or any kind of anything else. If the mechanics of the 2 characters or the characters on screen aren't right, then the game will fail. So I just love the purity of it, and I think even now, given a chance, I'd still like a go at trying to do a fighting game and trying to bring maybe a different slant to a genre which hasn't really moved on for many, many years.
We are overrunning at this point in time, so we'll take one more question. I'm going to offer it up to my mum at the back. Nothing? Okay. Yes.
How and why did Banjo 3 transform from straight sequel to nuts and bolts?
How and why did Banjo 3 transform from a straight sequel into nuts and bolts?
Yeah, pretty much because I'd got bored doing the previous formula. Obviously, the first game and then the second game was more of the same, but kind of bigger and cleverer. I just didn't feel I had anywhere left to go by doing a third one that was exactly the same. So we started exploring what could we do differently for a third game that maybe would take people by surprise, kind of shake the genre up a bit. And the first idea was to actually do a remake of Banjo 1, but then change the gameplay. So when you started the game, it made it look like it was exactly the same game with better graphics, but then the more you played, we'd actually change things that happened in the level. So in the first level with Mumbo's Mountain, the mountain was going to break open, there was going to be this massive termite that came out the top. So players that would have played it before, it was like, it's the same game, but it's different. But I think ultimately we were concerned that it would just be seen as a remake, even if it was clever. So then we started dabbling with an idea where it was like a more traditional banjo game, but the player played at the same time as Grunty, and Grunty was AI, and she'd be running around the levels trying to collect the jigsaw at the same time. So it was almost a battle between you playing banjo and then Grunty as AI playing a traditional banjo game. But we kind of turned that one down because of the problems with AI. We didn't think we could make AI that good enough to warrant the game. So kind of third time lucky was kind of looking at all platform games, like when you get to do the puzzles and the fun bits, as I call them, they were really cool. But the bits in between were quite boring. There's like lots of walking around on levels. I think I called it the travelling. So I looked for a way to try and make the travelling fun, and kind of hit upon the idea that rather than the character walking, what about if he rode? So to try and make the travelling fun, but then I wanted players to decide how they were going to travel, hence the creation of vehicles. So yeah, that's kind of where it came from. And I still love the game. I know it didn't do that well, and I know there's a lot of banjo purists out there that probably wasn't their kind of first choice, but I think it was a very ambitious project, and that the editor we wrote to put the vehicles together was probably one of the best pieces of software I've ever seen written at Rare. And I think the game's still fun, and I think when Rocket League came out a few years ago, I thought, that's actually banjo nuts and bolts. We were kind of ahead of our time, but maybe didn't quite package it right.
Right, well with that, thank you very much for coming to see us today. I've seen a few LPs and things hanging around, so I think we can stay for a short while to do signatures and stuff if people want so. But other than that, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for the Herbert for hosting, and yes, have a good rest of the day. Hello there. If you enjoyed that, then why not watch the behind-the-scenes footage of Rare's exhibition at the Herbert in Coventry, where this panel was filmed. Also, like and subscribe to the channel to see everything that we put out. There's a notification bell around here somewhere too. Thanks for watching.